waiting for it to go to 6:32. Oh, well. Well, it's 6:31, and we can go ahead and start the Planning Commission meeting, May 19th, 2026. Would you all please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, roll call. Commissioner Huggins. Not here. Commissioner DeVoynes?
Present.
Present. Commissioner Bowman?
Present.
Present. Commissioner Fatizzi?
President.
Commissioner Jasper?
Present.
Commissioner Furnett? Present. Commissioner Sexton? No. Okay. Did everyone have a chance to read the minutes from March 17th? We didn't have a meeting in April, so we're going to approve the minutes from March 17th. Any comments?
I was not present, so I have no comments.
Okay, neither was I. Did it all look good to you?
It looked great to me.
I make a motion to
Approve the minutes? Of March 17th. Commissioner Bowman, first, second.
So moved.
Commissioner, doggone it, Jasper. Second, and those in favor of approving, was I not supposed to say doggone it?
Aye.
Aye.
Oh, any other comment? Is that what I'm supposed to say?
Right.
Oh, I
Any
missed
other
that
co-
part.
any
All
other
those who
discussion?
approve the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. All approved, as written. Oh, you're over here now. Got me all mixed up. Yep. Okay, so that's good. Okay. 6:34, general public comments. I don't know if there's any, but please keep your comments to 3 minutes or less because state law prohibits the use of city facilities for the purpose of supporting or opposing a campaign or ballot proposition. We respectfully request that public comment not make reference to such matters. Written comments will be accepted by letter or via email at mmcgowan@sedro-woolley.gov. Attention public comment until 4:30 p.m. the day of the meeting. Do we have any public comments?
No written comments received.
Okay. And I don't see anybody up there. Nobody's in here, so general public comments over at 6:34. Public hearing, there isn't one. Unfinished business, none. New business at 6:34.
Good evening. Tom Glover, Director. Donna Keeler's with us here tonight, and so is Alex Plum via online. And we have asked them to take a look at our critical areas regulations, our ordinance, and conduct a gap analysis of what we have. So what that means is taking a look at the existing regulations, see what's needed to be fixed, repaired, amended because of legislation since the legislation passed since the last time this was updated, which is back in 2016, I believe. And as you know, we just got done with our comprehensive plan. This is like one of the next steps in our process is to begin updating our regulations. So we have our new critical areas ordinance update, and I will turn it over to Nicole. I must say thank you for doing the staff report. Did a good job. Is there anything you want to add before we?
Nothing to add.
Okay, thank you. Good. I'd like to turn it over then to Facet, to Donna, and to Alex then.
Thank you, Tom. So ideally, Alex would be here because it was her and her team that wrote the report that was in your packet today. But she couldn't make it. She had to do a presentation down on Lacey while she's on the phone. So I'm going to do my best to go through the presentation. And then I'm sure you'll have some questions. There's a lot of material to cover. And we'll just go through it. And then maybe at the end, if you just hold off your questions, and then Alex will be here to, between the two of us, we can get everything answered, or we can get back to you on that. So I'm going to go ahead and start. See, Thomas, can you move it down to the agenda page? Right. Thank you. So what we're going to cover today is just best available science overview. We also would, like Tom mentioned, some of the recommended changes to the critical areas ordinance, some of the key changes, and discussion. Next. So why are we doing this? Main reason is that your previous CAO, Critical Areas Ordinance, was updated in 2016, so it's already outdated. And since then, there's been new legislation passed, mostly in regard to natural resource lands in critical areas for around development regulations, and also natural resource lands in critical areas designations. I'll go over that in a minute. So what are critical areas? The state definitions are under the WAC, but they basically cover wetlands, fish and wildlife habitat conservation areas, geologically hazardous areas, frequently flooded areas, areas with a critical recharging effect on aquifers for potable water. And so there's some definitions in your code that we're recommending also that they be updated. See, Thomas, can you go to the no net loss? Thank you. So one of the features that's very important under critical area legislation and oversight is no net loss. And how that's applied is applied under WAC 365. And it says that counties and cities must protect critical areas. We've already know that. And cities that are opting to plan under the Act must consider definitions and guidelines in this chapter when designating critical areas and when preparing development regulations that protect all functions and values of critical areas to ensure no net loss of ecological functions. So that's our goal, is to obtain no net loss with these regulations. Next. So how are we doing that now? This is what the shift has been in the last 10 years, is application of best available science. So the state is now requiring cities to include best available science, we also call it BAS, when designating critical areas and when developing policies and regulations to protect those areas. Also, we must give special consideration of anadromous fisheries, and we're encouraged to protect both surface and groundwater resources. And also, this state legislation provides criteria for determining which information is the best available science. Next. So, best available science review, there's a technical memorandum from 2025 which incorporates the Skagit County BAS review by reference. Alex, if you're on the phone, can you talk a little bit more about that?
Alex is in the members here. Give me 1 second to grant permission to speak.
Hey, Don, a quick question. You're gonna, when we look at the inventory in Skagit County, different cities like Mount Vernon has a ton of critical areas. I mean, that's a real challenge in a lot of their planning. So are we going to talk about the county as a whole, or are we going to focus specifically on Sedro-Woolley as we go along through the presentation?
Today we're focusing only on Sedro-Woolley.
Okay.
Yes, I think I'm unmuted now, so let me know if you can hear me. But the Best Available Science Review Technical Memorandum that Donna is referencing discusses best available science that is specific to the city of Sedro-Woolley. It incorporates the Skagit County best available science review by reference as a whole of what the state considers as best available science, but does talk about specific inventories related to Sedro-Woolley.
Thank you, Alex. So under BIS review, it covers, not only definitions, functions, and values, key protection strategies for all critical areas, and also, which is a newer thing, is climate change for all these critical areas you see on the right-hand side there. So what we did is we underwent the gap analysis that's in your packet to review the existing development regulations, your CAO, and also the policies that were written into your new comp plan. And the gap analysis identifies recommendations for consistency then with BAS, the Growth Management Act, and also a number of them just to improve clarity and consistency. So the report specifies the use of best available science in the development of the critical area regulations. It also recommends revising some key terms just to be updated. Uses the term critical areas report rather than site. Well, this is for when you require a report to use the term critical areas report rather than site assessment to be consistent with the terminology. And also consider deleting the section critical area maps as it's a repetitive with your code at this time. Let's see, move on to the next one. Also, there are other things that we're recommending, and that is just clarify that the chapter applies to all development and recommends strengthening the purpose statement. Consider removing riparian corridors from the subsection referenced here, revising terminology for riparian corridor to riparian buffer area, reference chapter 17.66, flood damage prevention, add a provision noting in the case of conflicting codes, the regulation that provides the greatest protection to critical area should apply, and relocating some sections, the section on exemptions for critical area review requirements. Also have, next slide on definitions, general new definitions as listed here for migration zone, functionally disconnected buffer, hazard tree, LID, low impact development, and riparian buffer area. And then moving on to wetlands. So this is best available science, and you're going to see this terminology consistent with all the critical areas. For best available science is first set it up so for wetlands, for example, you identify and classify the critical area. And in this case, we're recommending a process by bringing in a qualified professional, following agency-approved methodology, using the 2014 Ecology Wetland Rating System, and then determining the function and values, which are listed below, which is really to protect water quality, hydrologic and habitat functions, and the vegetative buffer condition, habitat corridors, and the key protection standards, you'll note with the next following slides, are all on the right. And in this case for wetlands, they're to protect them against disturbance, mitigation sequencing, compensatory mitigation to achieve no net loss, sustainable compensation options, and protection in perpetuity. So our recommendations for wetlands are listed here. Before I go, the next few slides, there's a lot of words here. Did you all get a chance to read the report? Okay, yeah, you'll note there are a lot of recommendations for every critical area here. And so I don't need to go through all of these if you've had a chance to look at them.
Just-
Go ahead.
you really need to understand this stuff. You can throw this report out there, but unless you actually know what it means, and I think a lot of people up here, unless you live in this world, it really doesn't mean a lot. I mean, it's good reading, but the biggest things that I'm looking at in your report, and I think let's get to the meat of the bone, so to speak, is our existing code. I looked at it, you're right, I was like, that is like really generous as far as our setbacks on it, especially on a 3, 4, and a 2. And then if we look at what the state proposes, as well as I'm looking at different counties on the habitat scores, as well as the setbacks, they're really, really big deals. And I'm gonna tell you everybody why. So a category 3 is pretty common. In the city right now, we only have a 50-foot setback. And as soon as I saw that, I was like, wow, that is really generous. But if you take a look at what the state is saying on a 3, and let's just go to like all types, okay, just for argument's sake. Okay, depending on the habitat score, like Snohomish County, there are 5 to 7, okay, for their 110, okay? Where if you get an 8 or 9 at 225 versus 50, the amount of land that pulls away from the value of the property, the ability to put density in. I just want everybody to understand, this is a really big change, going from what we have to what the Department of Ecology and a whole lot of other people are stating. So I just want to like reiterate that there's certain things in there that unless you do this, she gets it, I know that, okay? It has a massive impact on a whole lot of things, from your densities to just all types of, afterthoughts, depending on where it's at.
Right.
I've seen things where, we were talking about this earlier, depending on the individual that goes there, certified professional. Well, that certified professional might just be newly minted, that in their mind, well, this is an emergent something, okay? And when they put their little numbers together and put things together, boy, that has an impact as to what you can and cannot do. So it's really important that we all understand that tonight's the first night looking at this, that we really understand what the impacts are if we're going to be adopting changes to this code and how it affects us specifically in this town. Like a 225-foot setback, and I'm just looking at the properties that we have in this city, going from a 50 to a 225, I can think of parcels. It'll wipe out probably half the value of that lot. So let's make sure that we get this right, is all I'm saying.
Yeah.
And this is,
yeah.
like I said, this is a textbook. I printed it. This is great stuff. But the impacts are pretty enormous, so, thank you.
And you have some options moving forward, which we're going to talk about, different approaches you can take for your buffer widths. And so maybe what I'll do is we'll go through these, because then later on, we're going to talk about your existing buffer widths and what your options are. So recommendations were to, specify 5-year validation period, update criteria for small wetland exemptions, update wetland buffer averaging criteria, and add criteria for increasing buffer widths, update the standard buffer provisions, including fully vegetated buffer requirements, address functionally disconnected buffer areas, emphasize mitigation sequencing, consider implementing habitat corridors, and update wetland buffer reports, mitigation plan requirements. So the next slide, here, we were talking about is the existing wetland buffers under your current code with a category 1 with the highest buffer of 150 feet and category 4 of 25 feet. And this is standard, has been standard pretty much across the state for most jurisdictions. But if you move on to the next slide, so things are, like you mentioned, Joe, things are really changing.
The habitat score now
Yeah.
that impacts
So-
what you can do on top of the classification, yeah.
Right, yeah, so this is one of 3 options that you'll see tonight for your wetland buffer width requirement. It's based first on the category of the wetland, what type of wetland it is, and then the habitat score points and depending on how many points you get, varies with the wetland buffer. Alex, if you're on, can you talk a little bit more about this?
So this option provides flexibility for jurisdictions if you implement impact minimization measures, which are on the next slide. And then if those impact minimization measures are not implemented, it would require a 33%, roughly a 33% increase based on Ecology's model ordinance.
Thanks, Alex. Thomas, can you go over the next slide? So the impact minimization measures here are some examples where if a certain disturbance is identified, such as lighting or noise or toxic runoff, and you can implement some activities to minimize that impact, that's an example of kind of a measure to reduce adverse impacts and provide. So that can potentially reduce your wetland buffer.
I'm wondering, so for the habitat corridor, can you explain to the Planning Commission what that is and how that requirement is directly related to just option 1?
Alex, did you
Yeah,
understand?
so a habitat corridor is essentially if there's areas between like a wetland and a buffer, that habitat corridors are prioritized, and that's part of the impact minimization measures. It's not like if you don't have a habitat corridor already established, or if you don't have a fully vegetated buffer, that's part of the requirements, is that if you have something that's sparsely vegetated or vegetated with invasive species, the buffer would need to be enhanced to meet that fully vegetated requirement that's appropriate for the ecoregion. So essentially, you would be creating a buffer that is intended to be fully functional, if that makes more sense.
Does the habitat corridor need to be connected to other wetlands in the area? When I was reading through the DOE recommendations, it sounded like they recommended an outside of just the buffer enhancement of the buffer requirements, a 100-foot was the recommended width of this corridor that could potentially connect the wetland on site to other wetlands throughout the city.
Yeah, so if the corridor is intended to have a minimum buffer width of 100 feet and then should connect wetlands that score 6 habitat points or more if they exist. So if they don't exist in that area, then you wouldn't be required to implement anything further besides the impact and minimization measures that are listed.
Okay, so if you can't provide a habitat corridor, then you are still eligible for option 1.
That's my understanding, provided that you meet the minimum requirements.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Thomas, can we go to the next slide? It's titled Ecology Buffer Option 2. Okay, so this option, it's based on also the wetland categories and your land use impact. So if the land use impact is determined to be low, your buffer is lower and then goes up to moderate and high. And for example, moving on to the next slide, here's an example of what would be considered low, medium, moderate, and high. So a high impact would be commercial, pretty much everything that happens in Sedro-Woolley. Commercial activity, urban, industrial, institutional, mixed-use developments, residential, if they're more than 1 unit acre. So really pretty much almost any activity in the city would be considered either moderate or high.
You know, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Like, let's look at the urban village mixed use, okay? So the reason we put that in place was to go vertical to contain the floor area ratio and the actual coverage, whereby, okay, that's classified as a high use, but I'm not only using less land, okay, I'm accommodating what I need as far as my housing, So to say that now I need 300 feet because now I've contained that amount of density, and let's say maybe a tenth of the space that I normally would have, going on a moderate use, that just doesn't make any sense. So I just want sensibility when we put this stuff together, that it's not a one-size kind of fits all, that we do have unique characteristics of that land use and what's actually placed there before we start setting different setbacks on different things. And listen, I get it. We have water every place, and I get the impact is, just from surface water runoff into the river and streams and everything. We're all clear on that. But also getting overly restrictive, where we're putting things specifically in place to contain that growth in a smaller area, let's just make sure that we have that conversation before we start actually putting things and making them ordinances, which is a law.
Right,
So-
right. Yeah, that's why we're presenting these different options to you. Some of these prescriptive approaches may not be the best for the city. And let me move on to the next buffer option, number 3, which is what we feel is the least flexible option. It's just straight out buffer based on, and kind of the what was previously used as for Category 1 wetland, it's a 300-foot, or same with Category 2, and then it goes down to 150 feet or 50 feet. It's the simplest to implement, but it's not necessarily using best available science, or may not even be protecting the wetland or the buffer. Okay, moving on to critical area recharge areas, next slide. You'll see the same BAS standards applied here, where you identify and classify, and in this case, it's identifying the USDA soil type, whether it's a special aquifer recharge protection area, wellhead protection area, and the functions and values below that, mostly water quality and quantity, stream base flows, wetland hydrology and flood attenuation, and then key protection standards using Ecology's guidance from 2021, identify where groundwater resources are located, analyze the susceptibility of the natural setting where groundwater occurs, inventory existing potential sources of groundwater contamination, classify the relative vulnerability of groundwater to contamination events, and designate areas that are at risk of being contaminated. Our recommendations in the report were to consider listing the criteria for critical aquifer recharge designations using the WAC, also known as CARAs. Remove reference to the saltwater intrusion. It's not applicable here. Consider adding impact avoidance and minimization standards. Consider adding BMPs to reduce the risk of groundwater contamination. List activities subject to additional assessment or prohibition. Specify when plan review is required. Expanding the list of regulated activities and reporting requirements. Updating the list of activities regulated in CARAs to reflect a broader set of activities with potential groundwater impacts. Update state and federal regulatory citations and expanded applicability. And finally, specify prohibited uses in all CARAs based on their potential to contaminate groundwater resources. So I don't know if you guys were listening to the news yesterday, but you've probably all heard about PFAS, the forever chemicals. The federal government is going to hold off for a couple of years before updating the standards for them. And right now, they only have standards for 2 of them, and until they learn more about them. So it'll be up to the local states and local communities to regulate themselves until that happens. Okay. Next, our geologically hazardous areas. Is that what? Yeah. So again, identify and classify site-specific assessment by qualified professional, and then subcategories and the different kinds from erosion hazard areas, landslide hazard areas, seismic hazard areas, tsunami hazard areas, and other geologically hazardous areas. And then identifying functions and values, those areas which pose a potential risk to people and to property, and dynamic natural processes. And then implement management standards to avoid the disturbances, buffers, earthquake-resistant building standards, which we already have, and engineered solutions. Next, recommendations include updating the designation language to align with the WAC. Remove the coastal zone atlas reference as it's not applicable here. We make it really clear when a report is required. Increase the minimum buffer for landslide and erosion hazard areas that have a vertical relief of 50 feet or greater, and consider requiring a quantitative analysis using a slope stability model prior to authorizing an alteration or buffer reduction. Next slide. Moving on to frequently flooded areas. Again, identify and classify. Under identify and classify, we've got FEMA mapping areas with 1% or greater chance of flooding each year, requiring that base flood elevation and floodway data or flood hazard study, identifying functions and values, floodwater storage and conveyance, fish and wildlife habitat, nutrient and sediment deposition, redistribution, and mobilization of large woody debris, and requiring key protection standards such as building standards and stormwater management, habitat assessments, and no net increase in floodplain elevation, and elevation and relocation of assets. Our recommendations then are to revise the frequently flooded areas to align with the WAC and include a crosswalk to Chapter 1766 flood damage prevention. Next, to fish and wildlife habitat conservation areas, BAS. Under identify and classify, designate fish and wildlife habitat conservation areas consistent with the WAC, and those would be including endangered, threatened, and sensitive species, habitats and species of local importance, lakes, ponds, streams, and rivers, and functions and values, biological, chemical, and physical habitat conditions. Under key protection standards, designate fish and wildlife habitat conservation area and buffer from adjacent land uses, require habitat assessment and management plans as applicable, require mitigation sequencing, and maintaining species in their natural habitat without creating isolated subpopulations. So with that, our recommendations are to update the designated species and habitats, clarify and update requirements for site assessment and habitat management plans, update and revise allowed uses, clarify that the decreasing buffer allowance is only intended to be applied for RUEs, or what they call reasonable use exceptions, update stream buffer dimensional standards to align with Fish and Wildlife guidance, require vegetated buffer widths, and remove timber harvest allowance and rely on DNR's FPA rules.
Can I stop you for a second? Who pays for all these studies? Because I'd start looking through all this documentation when we met with, council, and just looking at different recommendations from the different departments. Like we were talking about trees, where at 1 year they were going to send somebody out and do an inventory, and that just never, it just never developed. But a lot of the stuff that comes down from the state and the different state agencies, like for instance right here, remove timber harvest allowance and rely on DNR. DNR is right here in town. I don't think we have any harvestable timber directly in the city limits of Sedro-Woolley. I mean, you would see a permit. I mean, you might take down a tree or two. So a lot of the stuff doesn't apply. And the amount of cost to put these reports together to just say, hey, we don't have that. I'm just hoping that there's some kind of latitude as we go through these different guidelines that, okay, well, this applies, yeah, that this is good, okay, and this does not apply. And what do we already have that's existing? Like, for instance, the state, I think 4 years ago, mandated that we have fish passages underneath Highway 20 in different spots on Brickyard and things like that, and they did fund it. And you could see there's definitely steps now being taken to incorporate what those guidelines and what those different projects are. But as we move forward through this, I just see a whole lot of cost that I'm just hoping, like, there's resources that the powers that be that are saying that you need to do, that these different, funding sources are available to us to comply with this per WAC and RCW code.
Yeah, and it's challenging. And there's some cases where, we talked about dead, dying, and diseased trees, for example.
Uh-huh.
We could require an arborist, but there's flexibility in that of sending maybe a staff person out to take a look. In some cases, it's pretty obvious, right?
Right, it looks dead. Take it
Yeah,
out.
and to have to
We're
hire
gonna
an
send Tom
arborist
out.
to do that, But there might be other situations where you really do need a professional wetland scientist or someone to
Right.
go out there. So
And it's expensive, by the way.
yeah,
I
and
did a
it's
small
expensive.
project, 2 acres.
Especially a single-family home.
It was
Yeah.
$6,000 for the delineation.
Mm-hmm.
$6,000. That's out of your pocket. That you can't finance that or anything else before you can even say, hey, I'm going to put a septic here. I'm going to put a stick right there.
Yeah, it is challenging. There's some jurisdictions who are, if the bigger ones, they might have resources in-house to do that work. But for smaller cities like Sedro and other communities, it's difficult.
In my experience, it varies tremendously depending
Right.
on the jurisdiction. And some of the bigger jurisdictions are by far the worst.
Yeah, yeah.
Can I jump in real quick just to add on to that? So I just want to touch base a little bit on generally how staff determine what we want to see in a critical areas report. So when projects trigger SEPA, and even if they don't, so we have a critical areas checklist for smaller projects that we think probably won't trigger SEPA. And it's just a simple kind of questionnaire that says, hey, is there standing water on your property? Do you have any significant tree coverage? Questions like that to give us an idea of the picture of the property in combination with their project. If there's any indicators, red flags on there, and we're like, there might be a critical area on there, then we'll conduct a site visit, look at it, and see if that's something that we maybe need to run SEPA environmental review on. For SEPA environmental review, that's a much lengthier and more specific list of questions. Madison knows them well. But yeah, so we go through at length, asking several questions about kind of the general site conditions when it comes to environmental conditions on the property. We'll conduct a site visit to verify that those things are true and correct. And from there, staff make the determination on what is applicable that we want to see in the critical areas report. So if you don't have forested lands on your property, I'm not going to ask for a forested lands report.
We've had this discussion, and we've actually reviewed SEPA reports in the past during commission meetings, and I've always said, don't fear the SEPA. When you look at that questionnaire, it really isn't that invasive. I mean, it's pretty basic in a lot of the respects when you look at that questionnaire in general. I get it that it triggers it and it's required by the state, but it's nothing that we should fear the SEPA. It's just another step, and you might add, 45 days longer for whatever to a project, or it's in conjunction with other things going on at the same time, so.
Yeah, typically SEPA review takes roughly a month to complete the full process. We do a notice of application combined with a SEPA comment period that allows anyone within 500 feet of the subject property that the project is going on the opportunity to comment on the proposal if they think there may be environmental considerations or concerns that maybe staff need to take a little closer look at, or maybe we haven't quite addressed. We'll put together kind of a list of anticipated conditions that apply to the project. And basically it says these are what we're looking at applying to make sure that we're A, compliant with our critical areas ordinance, and B, protecting public safety, health, et cetera. And then after that public comment period is over and we've received all those comments, we forward those onto the applicant, make sure that we're kind of tag team and making sure that all of those concerns have either been addressed or can be addressed through conditions. then we issue a threshold determination, and that is when we officially assign those conditions to the project based off what we heard in the public feedback. So that has its own 14-day appeal period, so after all is said and done, it's roughly a month to go through that process. All of that happens at the same time as the application materials are being reviewed, so we try to line those timelines up as best as we can.
In your experience, how many times has that really happened in the city specifically that we've had just a problem or whatever? It looks like the percentage of issues like that is probably fairly low.
How many SEPA environmental reviews we do?
No, I'm just saying how many SEPA reviews I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that review process revealed a real problem that the project couldn't go forward, or it couldn't be addressed or mitigated or something like that.
I'd say maybe one project in a year really
Right,
has
okay.
issues like that.
Yeah,
And not so much that can't go forward.
yeah,
Some mitigation
yeah.
Yeah, typically it's a situation where staff don't quite have the expertise to make an informed decision.
Sure.
So then we have to bring in a third-party environmental consultant to kind of be able to help us hash out what those conditions should be, or potentially redesign of the project if that's
Yeah,
necessary.
where I was going with this, we're helping people, I guess is what the point is. It's not like I've seen other jurisdictions where they're just gonna slam the door and not look to assist and facilitate whatever's going on to have everybody be successful at one point or another. I mean, you can't always get what you want, but you get what you need. I've had that discussion with.
All right, Thomas, can you go on to the next slide? Okay, want to talk a little bit about site potential tree height. It's a new framework. Well, it's not new, but it's just now being applied in the state. It's new guidance from Fish and Wildlife for riparian areas that emphasizes a shift in terminology from the concept of stream buffers to riparian management zones, or RMZs. An RMZ is defined as a, quote, a scientifically based description of the area adjacent to rivers and streams that has a potential to provide full function based on the site potential tree height conceptual framework. Further, an RMZ is recommended to be regulated as Fish and Wildlife Conservation Area itself. It's kind of interesting approach, and it's another tool that jurisdictions have the option of using. Alex, do you want to talk a little bit more about what what jurisdictions are doing with this? It's still pretty new, so it's still evolving.
Sure. So I think we have slide. So if you want to bring up the next slide.
We got it here. Okay.
Oh, you just want me to talk about the site potential tree height framework?
Just anything else that I may have missed on that, because it's so new.
So Department of Fish and Wildlife put out a volume 1 guidance document, which is considered to be the synthesis of best available science. And then volume 2 is the management recommendations that include the recommendation to incorporate site potential tree height 200 as a methodology for protecting riparian areas. They also produced a site potential tree height 200 tool, which essentially is an online GIS tool that has varying soil polygons that specify what the predominant tree species of that soil polygon would be with an associated site potential tree height value. And we can talk about what that methodology means in terms of application for the city of Sedro-Woolley.
Yeah, so what you have in front of you here is you've got two approaches here. One is a more prescriptive model based on water type. The first one, water type riparian buffer for types 1 and 2, 200 feet, type 3, 110, and type 4 and 5, 50, versus using the site potential tree height 200 tool. So the streams in that case are not classified. It's based on ecological functions. based on the site potential tree height value and with a minimum buffer width of 100 feet. And like Alex mentioned, there's use of the tool with the polygons identifying. I'll show you a picture of those polygons in a minute.
Yeah, I
So-
think it's just important to reference that the potential tree height values range in Sedro-Woolley from 100 feet to 245 feet. And then the way that Sedro-Woolley currently manages riparian buffers uses an outdated typing system. So part of our recommendations include that you would shift that methodology to regulate your type S waters through your shoreline master program, and then utilize like type F, which is fish-bearing streams, and type non-fish, which would be non-fish perennial or non-fish seasonal streams.
I have a question for Tom and Nicole. The only riparian water that we have in our city limits would be the south border of the city on the river, right? That should be it. Where else would we have riparian waterways in the city? Brickyard Creek wouldn't be considered riparian. It would just be, I'm just thinking Riverside Park and all properties along the south border. That would be it. I'm just trying to think of what's even down there. A lot of it's just open space, and that's pretty much it. We got some big trees down there, and they're nice, but go ahead, I'm listening.
Oh, I was just going to say that the term riparian is intended to also be applied for streams. So I think what you're thinking of is the type S water, which is regulated under your shoreline master program.
Okay.
But you do have a number of streams that are considered fish and wildlife habitat conservation
Yeah, we do.
areas.
Yeah, very much
And
so.
are regulated as streams.
I'm just trying to think of the size of the trees we have along those streams. Not really, no, they're,
The vast majority of Brickyard Creek, the buffers that exist
There's no
along it
trees on
have been
Buck-
largely degraded.
yeah.
You'll see that a lot with what's in the kind of western side of town. Since a lot of that was agricultural, it was mostly used as a ditch.
Yeah,
Like,
no, totally. I don't even
see-
know of any trees on
Yeah,
Brickyard.
you'll see blackberries and it kind of
Yeah,
invasive
yeah.
invasive species. Where it is a little bit better functional habitat is maybe more in the northeast side of things.
Yeah, and the site potential tree height methodology considers what trees could grow there and then what trees could grow to, or at what height that they would grow to in a 200-year time frame.
Okay, moving on to then, oh, I'm sorry.
Would Hampton Creek be considered a riparian area in Sedro-Woolley?
Did you say Hanson Creek?
Yes.
Hanson Creek would be a riparian, yes.
Well, and this will also impact the UGA up north by Bottomless Lake. There's some significant trees around that, and I'm looking at your tree height diagram right now. So if that UGA became in city limits, that would definitely impact there.
Sorry. And areas of standing water too. We've got a couple places. I'm thinking especially east of town. And around Fruitdale.
Areas of standing water east of town.
Yeah, we have a lot of areas on the kind of northeastern side of town that do have a high groundwater table.
Yeah.
And a lot of wetlands out there, especially along that be North Fruitdale Road, just past the Cascade Natural Gas easement on that east side of it. There's a lot of wetlands that way. Kind of, I think it all runs down from like Northern State Campus. It's all very wet out there.
That's unincorporated Skagit County, though. So once you get east of Fruitdale, and we got beavers all over the place there. I mean, the Highway 20 will flood every now and again, but that's, I mean, that wouldn't apply to us, because Fruitdale's like that cutoff line. Even though you're right, towards that whole Northern State Campus, that's why it's beautiful. I mean, yeah, it's what makes it what it is.
I'll move on to the next slide. For streams, we stay with the stream classification and buffers. The pros on that would be there's clear criteria for fish habitat, presence, and absence. Fixed buffers are predictable for landowners and administrators. The cons, the buffer widths may not fully support riparian function. They're not fully aligned with Fish and Wildlife's guidance. Next. By going with a riparian management zone approach, the pros on that, you're fully aligned with best available science. Site potential tree height riparian widths set to achieve full riparian functions. Targets functional potential by site, it's site by site, and landowners have the option to obtain a site-specific assessment. The cons, it's a new approach, it's not fully understood, it's still evolving, like I mentioned earlier. Increased number of non-conforming uses and structures would occur, and a third-party review would likely need to be established. Oh gosh. Next slide.
So this displays the site potential tree height values by stream length across the city limits through a GIS analysis that we did to help inform your decision. And so as you'll see here, they range from 100 feet to 245 feet, with the average being 223 feet.
And then the next slide. Let's see.
This demonstrates a, let's see. When I talk, it doesn't show the slide anymore, but so the blue area is your current buffer width scenario. The yellow width would be what we modeled was a type F stream at 150 feet and your type N streams at 100 feet. So that's what the yellow represents. And then red would be site potential tree height 200 based on the WDFW tool.
Next slide. Can you explain this one too, Alex?
Sure. So this is just a more detailed, like this is a zoomed in area. So the cross-hatched lines represent the current buffer widths. The yellow again represents the scenario that we modeled, which was 150 feet for type F and 100 feet for non-fish streams. And then the white line would be site potential tree height 200.
And then next slide, here's an example of the polygons that Alex was talking about. So they're based on best available science and not on parcel lines. So there might be a polygon, that might cover more than one parcel.
And there's also varying site potential tree height widths for a single soil polygon. And that's where, in the previous slide, there was a reference that you might have to establish a third-party review process, or landowners would have an option to obtain a site-specific assessment, because the guidance that we've received from Fish and Wildlife is that even though that there's a soil polygon that has multiple site potential tree height values, the expectation is to utilize the highest site potential tree height value for the single soil polygon.
Okay, so here's the silly question. A lot of this area is already developed. So are we saying that the places that already have housing or whatever are in it, we're going to go back and say you need to start taking your trees down? I mean, what's the practicality of having all of this together if in fact it just doesn't lend itself to just the reality of what's already in place? Is that a stupid question, or is that a
No.
question that-
So if there is development that is now being encumbered by a new buffer, whether it be wetlands or riparian areas, it would essentially limit the opportunities for redevelopment or expansion, and would consider those structures to be non-conforming to the new provisions.
But what if they were conforming at the time that they were put in, right? We just can't change the to say all of a sudden now you're non-conforming after they went through the whole process of permitting, approval, and everything else, because somebody at the state now says, well, gee, we now have to apply this, and now you're in a non-conforming status. I mean, that's
Can I
going to affect the
jump in on that
value.
real quick?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so we do have code on non-conforming structures. So what we allow is repairs and maintenance of existing structures.
Okay.
It's the moment that you try adding it to your floor area or
Okay.
additional substantial development on a property that you have that non-conforming
Oh, I
use
totally
on.
get it. If you look at our commercial zone going down Highway 20, a lot of those are single-family residences, even though they're in a commercial zone, and that's right, you can't put another bedroom or whatever in there. I totally get that.
Yeah, exactly. So that's essentially it. We're not going to make you remove your house if it's, in a problem area after this code change gets updated. But yeah, it does become a legal non-conforming structure. And then you can do repairs or maintenance work just with simple building permits. But the moment that you try to expand development that is non-conforming, that's something that goes through a conditional use permitting process and likely would be not supported by staff.
Okay.
So.
So I'm just assuming that when we get through all this discussion, at some particular point, there will be a public hearing on this, because if I'm a property owner in any of these areas, and all of a sudden now something comes in after the fact that is going to change what the status of my real estate investment is, I think I might want to have a say. I just want to get that on the record, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's legally non-conforming, you're grandfathered in, you just can't make it more non-conforming.
One question about non-conforming. If your house, heaven forbid, should burn down, can you rebuild it?
No.
That's what I thought.
Right, so I got a problem with that.
Okay, here's another slide. And just wanted to point out, and Alex can add to this, that gaps in the tool may exist, and tribal and federal and state lands may have their own RMZ designation, which makes it a little more complex. Alex, do you have any more to add to that?
No, I think you covered it. It's difficult to administer if there is gaps in the tool, is what we've heard from other jurisdictions. And then, as we've shown here, that there are some areas that are managed by tribal, federal, or state lands within city limits that this would be difficult to apply to.
And one last slide. So this is what they call the FEMAT curve, that stands for Forest Ecosystem Management Assessment Team. Refers to a set of conceptual models that were developed by this team in 1993. It illustrates how essential riparian ecosystem functions such as shade, large woody debris recoupment, and leaf litter input diminish as the distance from the stream channel increases, and then it just reaches a point of, it starts point of no return and starts going down again. So how that works is use the tree height rule. The curve demonstrates that the full functional benefit, often at 70 or 80% or more of the riparian forest, occurs within one site potential tree height. And then the diminishing returns as the rate of effectiveness declines with distance from the channel. Alex, do you have anything more to that?
Yes, and so as we talked about earlier, the GIS analysis represented that the average site potential tree height for the city limits was 223 feet. Roughly 75% of the site potential tree height 200 values would be approximately 167 feet. So that's why we created that GIS scenario that had 150 feet, because your code currently requires that you have a 15-foot building setback from a buffer, so that would effectively be 165 feet, which is close to the 75% of all site potential tree height values within city limits.
So that concludes the presentation. So we're ready to discuss. I'm sure you have a lot of questions and thoughts that you'd like to share.
Any questions? Well, people are thinking I have, have something? One of your slides, I didn't remember which one, it said flood water storage. Could you describe what that is and how would that happen?
Alice, you want to take that on? Let's see if I can find that.
Sure. So I think you are referring to, are you talking about frequently flooded areas?
Yes.
Okay, so floodwater storage is essentially just talking about what best available science is. So the protection of riparian or frequently flooded areas also provides functions for floodwater storage. It's not requiring the city to do anything different. We were just noting that the best available science for protection standards and protection of functions and values includes highlighting the importance of floodwater storage and conveyance, and that it also provides fish and wildlife habitat and these other functions and values in addition to just not requiring development within those areas.
Okay, thank you.
I don't have any. As a matter of fact, when I first came in, like I said, I rarely print the whole document. This is like a textbook. So this isn't the things that just apply to Sedro-Woolley. This applies to everybody. So I think you guys did a great job on it. I will have more questions the next time. All I'm saying is critical areas, especially on wetlands, I'm real familiar with. But all the stuff now with the trees and the riparian shading and things like that, that's all new to me. You know, I get the geologic stuff, and, you know, as I think about the city, I can think of just a couple of spots where we have potential, you know, elevation issues. Going up a township, for example, on the east side to the Fruitdale side, yeah, then we go uphill, which I always thought was a great evacuation route, heading uphill, because that gets us up probably about 100+ feet off the valley floor, where the fire station is up on the top there.
We also have some steep slopes kind of on the southern end where the floodplain meets development.
Okay.
So, yeah, take a look. If you head down into Riverfront Park, you go down a pretty big hill.
Yeah, you're right, yeah.
So, Tom and Nicole, did you want to talk about what you're thinking of your recommendations as staff for the wetland buffer widths?
I can touch it.
We don't have to, or we can wait till next time. But-
Yeah, no, that's okay. So looking at these options, staffs are in most supportive option one as far as the wetland protection. So reason I say that, so looking at option 3, that most closely mirrors how we have been assigning standard buffers, just significantly increases the minimum buffers. Option, what was it?
2.
Option 2, yeah. Here, let me look at it. Put me on the spot, Donna.
Oh, sorry, Nicole. It's okay.
No, just to chime in for a second, when I looked at option 3, yeah, that's like, kind of like, believe it or not, when I look at other code, okay, that's kind of like the in-between. For instance, Snohomish County, they'll let you mitigate a category 3, even with a high wetland score, by declaring the remainder a native growth protection area and putting in like a split rail fence, and they'll let you get more land back. So when I looked at 150, that's kind of like in the middle. I was like, okay, it's not 225, but it's also not 50. But anyway, that's kind of where you would be if you had to mitigate and then get a little bit more back. So that was kind of like in the middle of everything, and it didn't base it on a habitat score as well. And that gets kind of tricky.
So
too.
my opinion on option 2 is while you're seeing kind of more reasonable minimum buffer widths, when you're talking about more complex projects with land uses that vary, mixed-use developments can be tough to kind of justify, like, is it truly a moderate or is it truly a high? So that would be, it's a little bit more difficult for staff to implement reasonably and fairly among all applicants. So it's like, you know, you look at a project that was done this way and then a very similar project that maybe was done a different way. It gets kind of tricky and there's risk with that. With option 1, this is my preference, where you have more site-specific data, right? So we're looking at using the categories of the wetlands, we're using the habitat scores, and we're using the impact minimization measures. So those best reflect the actual existing conditions of the site. And then you also combining that with the incentives that the applicant may provide as far as enhancing degraded buffers. We know we have a lot of those in the city, especially along Brickyard Creek, and then mitigating the specific impacts of their proposal. I'm thinking about this more on the conversation on the flood storage as well. I think improving Brickyard Creek is going to be big for us, because when we saw what we saw with the 2025 December flooding was a lot of backflow happening with Brickyard Creek, and it was pulling out onto Highway 20. So if we can find a way to site-specifically analyze what is the best treatment for those critical areas, we will be able to provide further flood storage and prevent waters from crossing over Highway 20 and preventing evacuation during flood. And everybody goes to Cook Road because that's the only way in and out of the city. So that's my opinion on it.
Which could
Option-
flood as well, depending on the level of what situation we're dealing with. That's all flat. From 20 straight on to Cook, you could easily have that underwater depending on the severity of what's going on. Yeah, you bet.
I have some questions. My first question is what is actually required to be adopted from DOE's recommendations? 'Cause is this similar to like the affordable housing situation when we were like, oh, we have to figure out how to provide this many units? Are we creating this code that's with the city of Sedro-Woolley in mind, and not just taking these exact recommendations and putting them in place?
Alex, can you help?
Yeah, I
that
can
question?
answer that one. So as Donna pointed out earlier, you're required to consider best available science when developing your regulations. The city can depart from best available science for a number of reasons, but you still have to demonstrate that no net loss is being achieved. Department of Ecology's guidance is considered to be a moderate risk approach to managing wetland areas. Most jurisdictions do follow their guidance very closely. There's some jurisdictions that have slightly different methodologies around that, but it does increase your risk of appeal. So currently Snohomish County is being appealed right now, as well as Skagit County, in terms of their critical area ordinance updates. And they all considered increases to their critical area protections.
Hey, just a question, just to follow up on what you just said on no net loss.
Yes.
So there's a lot of different developments that I've seen. I'll tell you, it was the University of Washington at Bothell that utilized a wetland bank, right? So they had, I think they had 3 acres that they had to mitigate that was technically a wetland, and then they had to find a wetland bank somewhere in the state that I guess is, authorized by whoever, I don't know. And then they had to provide 25 acres of banking, so to speak. So we're not being mandated, okay, but we do have to consider. However, is a wetland banking solution taken off the table, or can that be part of that consideration as well? I'm just trying to keep options open for what's already in place, and we don't want to just box ourselves in from a code standpoint for other people. I mean, it's not just for us, it's for, a whole lot of different reasons. So I just want to make sure that, number one, this is not mandated, okay? It needs to be considered, and we're absolutely, going through those steps. But I just want to make sure we're not precluding other options that are common throughout the state.
So you are mandated to update your critical areas regulations.
That's fine,
in
that's
okay,
easy. Yeah.
Okay, in consideration of best available science, and you must achieve no net loss. In terms of the wetland mitigation bank, that is considered to be a compensatory mitigation option.
Okay.
It wouldn't allow you to not increase your wetland buffer widths, if that makes sense. But it is an option if you have a state certified wetland mitigation bank that the
Okay.
impacts that you're proposing are within that service area.
To accommodate a no net loss potential variance by an acre or, a quarter acre or whatever it is. I just want to make sure that it doesn't prohibit somebody from utilizing that as a tool potentially, depending on what their individual situations are. That's it. Okay.
Yes, we did, that is in the code, I believe. And
Okay.
if it's not, I'll make sure that it is.
Thank you.
And I have some questions to piggyback off of that. So right now, the city of Sedro-Woolley, you can use mitigation banking. You can do buffer averaging. There's allowable buffer reductions up to a certain amount. How will those options be changing?
So the recommendation from Department of Ecology is that buffer reduction is no longer recommended through best available science. In terms of buffer width averaging, that is something that the city could retain with additional criteria. So that is something that we included in the gap analysis as a consideration. And wetland mitigation banking would also be retained.
And then the city, I am not super familiar with this, but the city of Mount Vernon does a buffer buyback program. I don't know if that isn't going to be off the table with these.
It's a buffer buyback.
You pay, so we're going through the options right now with the city of Mount Vernon on a single family residential lot. The buffer is off of their property, or the wetland is off of their property, but the buffer encroaches onto their property. So, and I'm not sure if the money that's paid, it's about $60,000 to get this buffer reduced. I don't know if the city then takes that money and enhances wetlands somewhere else in the city, similar to like a mitigation banking system. Maybe you guys are familiar with their
Yeah, I
code
think what
for
you're
it?
talking about is an in lieu fee program. So there is the option that the city could establish an in lieu fee program where instead of paying credits to a bank, the city could collect fees for impacts to mitigate or like restoration projects or other things to help achieve no net loss within city limits that would be managed by the city instead of a third party.
How do you price that? Like 60 grand for?
Yeah, so when you do a mitigation banking process, depending on your values of that wetland, you have credits, right? So you have to buy a certain amount of credits to essentially that amount of credits, that money that you pay, they go out and they plant however many trees necessary or do whatever enhancement technique is required that's equivalent to those credits. But the idea of enhancement within city limits, in lieu, is I think would be a lot more appealing for the city. Because right now if you go up towards the roundabout at Big Rock and Mount Vernon, on the left-hand side, that big open space that looks all
That's
wetland.
Skagit Land Trust.
Yeah, so Skagit Land Trust owns some of that, but the mitigation, that's a mitigation bank.
Okay.
Yeah, so, and I think it's called Clear Valley Farms, Clearwater Farms.
Know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, so currently, people all over Skagit County can pay mitigation credits to that area, and it's enhanced in that area. But it would be great to see the enhancement within the city limits, in my opinion.
Along Brickyard Creek and a whole
Yeah.
bunch of different places. Hanson Creek, I can think of a whole bunch of places.
Jump in on that real quick. So we do have a code section for a fee in lieu. It's not something that we have officially ironed out, but it has been something that we've talked about recently about implementing. The conversation came up because of the Jones-John Liner Road improvements. There is a wetland established, like protected critical area tract for a wetland established in a mobile home park. And that mobile home park, typically, you would have, similar to an HOA, somebody who would be maintaining and overseeing that. That doesn't exist for that mobile home park anymore. So there hasn't been anyone to contact regarding the impacts to the wetland. And then there's just kind of some complication with that too. It's essentially the city would have to like gain control of a portion of that wetland buffer so that we can just maintain a little portion of it.
What does the assessor's office say on that? Because it should be a parcel, and a lot of mobile home parks, what they do is the individuals own their unit, however, they lease the land back from whoever owns the land. But you should be able to find out who actually owns that piece through county records, no?
There are records of a mobile home park association.
Okay,
but
that's no
the-
longer
The
in-
person doesn't exist
Or
anymore.
they passed on, or?
Yeah, it's just an oddball thing. But, yeah, so it was a question that was brought up, like, instead of doing that complicated mess, why don't we do a fee in lieu where, we'll have these unmitigatable impacts to this wetland, and then the Reed Street Park that's just south of ways, that has a small kind of degraded, sad-looking wetland, why don't we, because of the master plan that was developed for that park, preliminary in nature, but it has enhanced wetland, like, integrated into the park design. So we were like, why don't we have this fee in lieu, put a bucket of money towards improving that wetland area per the plan?
What about eminent domain, especially on the mobile side where nobody knows who's what? What about a petition for an eminent domain action to just take it and then bring it back to life? I mean, we have tools in the toolbox, I guess, from a city standpoint.
I don't know if, Tom, you might want to weigh in on eminent domain, but it is,
It's used sparingly. don't
Used
go to the-
sparingly, yeah,
It's,
people-
just
that's
to
kind of the-
widen streets and sidewalks and things, but in a situation like this for a critical area that's non-usable anyway, non-developable, where at least somebody takes it over to bring it back into a state where it's useful for wildlife and everything else wetlands do. I don't know, I'm just throwing it out there.
Yeah, typically, eminent domain wouldn't be used for something like that, but that's not to say that something couldn't be worked out, and then some kind of wildlife organization could take it over for management. It's just a thought, but yeah. Typically, eminent domains for public
Yeah,
roadways. and-
sidewalks, I've had a couple of clients that we
Yeah,
had to deal with
yeah,
that, yeah.
Well, and to go back to the question about how the in lieu fees are established, the city would be required to create an in lieu fee use plan, which would essentially establish something similar to like the wetland banking instrument that would have to be approved by Department of Ecology and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And there's very few in lieu fee programs that have been approved at the state so far, so it is something that jurisdictions are newly considering.
How long does a process like that take? I'm just listening to the different organizations involved, especially Corps of Engineers, because that goes down to a totally different rabbit hole, so to speak, because there's just so much that they have going on, right? On top of Department of Ecology or whoever else. That sounds like that's a process that could take years.
I'm not sure because it is something that is relatively new. If the city would like to explore it, we can send an email out to Ecology with an estimated time frame on what that looks like once they have a completed plan to review.
Thank you.
And then if you utilize the fee in lieu, would you go through the same process with the DOE and the Army Corps that you go through when you're utilizing a mitigation bank within the same basin?
Well, I think since it would be city managed, it would only apply within the city. but we can check on that for you. I've actually never created one, so I don't want to misquote that, but we can ask how it would be applied.
Yeah, thank you. I'm very curious. I haven't heard of, like, this option just has my wheels turning.
Yeah, it's something that jurisdictions are definitely considering. We're even talking to some jurisdictions about that they want to consider it for shoreline impacts as well. So it's definitely something that is evolving.
It's just, it is another tool. With mitigation banking, there's some limitations because they have to be approved by Fish and Wildlife and other agencies, and then there's only a certain amount of credits per bank, and once they're all purchased, you know, so I don't know how many there are in the state, but there aren't very many, so.
I have a few more. Does anybody else want to?
No, go for it.
My general thoughts when looking at this is just dollar signs, just coming from a private sector standpoint, individual property owner standpoint. I think for option number 1, so it looks like there's 2 different buffer width options within option number 1. So within option number 1, it notes, let's see. So it has the impact minimization measures and the habitat corridor. So I just want to verify that this first portion of option number 1, if there is no habitat corridor available to connect to, because I don't know if you guys have looked at the National Wetlands Inventory map. If you kind of take a look at it and like look at Sedro-Woolley.
Yeah, I think I did misspeak. So
Okay.
if the model ordinance does say that if you can't apply the mitigation measures or are unable to provide a protected corridor, then the expanded buffer widths are intended to be applied.
Okay, so when I look at the and this does not delineate all wetlands in Sedro-Woolley by any means, but if you just take a look at the national inventory map, the wetlands within the city are very scattered. So to be able to meet that corridor requirement, that not only is 100 feet by however long it has to be to connect to another wetland source, additional area loss for buildable area loss, you have to kind of think about like the actual feasibility of connecting wetlands on your own property and or so you're putting that burden on that individual property owner, right? So I think that though option number 1 with the habitat corridor and the minimization measures, those buffer numbers look considerable. The actuality and putting that in place, I think, is probably pretty unlikely for a lot of landowners within the city. It's also, yeah, the buffer is reduced, but you're losing 100 feet by however long your corridor is. And how that corridor is routed, right, that plays a lot into site layout. So I think that's something to keep in consideration. A lot of the minimization measures, these are already regulated within other codes. So like within the lighting section, the current electrical code requires photocell and motion sensor lighting on exterior lights for residential buildings now. And and I'm not sure if the city of Sedro-Woolley does it, but a lot of other cities, when you're doing any kind of commercial development, you have to provide a exterior lighting plan, a photo metric of it. Those lights have to be downward facing. They have certain bulb requirements. Like there's a lot of these things already happen within other code requirements. So I want just something to point out. And then another question is it's less applicable if you can't provide that habitat corridor, but if there's no impact being proposed, so say you're doing a land division alone and you're not proposing any building, you can't hit these minimization impacts, right? Like if you are just subdividing land and have to go through this process and have this wetland delineated, like the noise and the toxic runoff and the lights, that's all in regard directly to constructing something. So then it begs the question of, okay, so we have these, where you have to delineate a wetland, right? The wetland scientist comes out and says, this is where the wetland is. They delineate the buffer. They say, this is where your buffer is. Well, you can't even qualify for these reduced buffers unless you are proposing some sort of development, because you have to meet these minimization impacts. So that's a concern to me, because then, say this wetland's delineated, whether it just stays a delineated wetland, it has to go into a PCA easement or a PCA tract. Well, then is that when you propose your development, can you go back and say, actually, we're gonna reduce what this delineated wetland is because now we're trying to meet these minimization measures? So it's something to kind of, like, the process of that is something to kind of keep in mind. I just think that the habitat corridor is not realistic throughout Sedro-Woolley. Like it's a great idea, but I think it puts kind of an unfair burden on individual property owners when like the actual wetland systems throughout the city shouldn't be their responsibility to connect. Option number 2, I feel like level of impact from proposed land use, like everything is high. Everything would be in the high category. And those are big buffers. When you're in I also think that this residential, more than 1 unit per acre, that's a huge hit to independent property owners in city limits, especially with, it goes against what we're trying to accomplish in the comprehensive plan by providing more housing, right? And so there's some tug at some of the stuff that I'm reading through this. Option number 3, those are big buffers. That's a lot of land when you're looking at it from a development perspective. Also, when you're looking at, when you pay a mitigation bank to, for credits, right, to enhance a wetland elsewhere, they include your entire buffer area. So the cost to mitigate or to fill a wetland, say you're gonna pay credits and have something enhanced somewhere else, that just got astronomically more, a lot more expensive. So that's something to keep in mind. Those are all of my like general comments on the options that were provided. I have a question about, sorry, I have a question.
These are great questions, though. No, and
Yeah.
it's realistic, though.
And I have a question about, so I'm looking to get informed here. So when you have a mitigation project and you have to enhance that mitigation, there is a 5-year monitoring period. And then once that's monitored by the person that proposed and installed the mitigation, is the city then taking on monitoring of that enhanced area?
No.
Okay.
So it's still required to be protected, but after the 5 years, applicants are no longer required to submit mitigation monitoring reports, unless it is a scrub shrub wetland or a forested wetland. The ecology guidance recommends a period of 10 years for monitoring.
Okay.
So let me give you a real-life example of what happened when I had a situation like that about 5 years ago. So the owner of the property just didn't file that report for 2 years. And then, blackberry grows everywhere. I got to tell you, Snohomish County came down and slammed him. We had an acre that we had to hire people to go in and rip out blackberries. So that means we need to shoot every single robin that goes on that property that does its thing, that's laying seeds all over the place. Blackberry are every place, but they're an invasive species. So it gets to a point that, okay, we're monitoring things that need to be checked, but the cost of actually keeping that compliant in something that's totally unreasonable, there just doesn't seem some balance going on there. And if we're going to start doing things around here, let's make sure that we have that in mind of what the practical, issues are when you have open land, okay, that needs to be monitored. And we have stuff that grows around here all the time. I'm just throwing that out there because it looks good here. And back to what we were talking about earlier on this option 2. We have a high impact with a 300-foot setback, but here are we trying to keep code to keep the footprint of the actual development smaller in order to provide more open space. Okay, but now we're throwing an additional 300 feet on top of that. So the practicality of what we're looking at and what we're trying to accomplish sometimes don't mesh, so to speak, right? It seems to take our options away by just defining something as just because it has this, it now requires that, where in fact it's actually less of an impact from a footprint standpoint. So anyway, this is all great stuff, and this is a great conversation today. But to refine this stuff to be more practical for what we're trying to do, as well as what we've put in our comprehensive plan, is very, very important as well. So as soon as I looked at what we're looking at tonight, I was like, okay, boom. Like I said, great job. I understand it, yeah.
To piggyback off of the cost of mitigation planting and the cost of maintenance. So the cost of mitigation planting for like mid-level enhancement, I ran some numbers, and it's about $10 per square foot. The actual monitoring of it over the 5-year period has cost more than the actual planting itself. So you think, okay, so you're monitoring a 150-foot buffer. Now we're going to double it, and now you have double the planting, double the monitoring, and the maintenance to take care of. So it's something that just more dollar signs, in my opinion.
And you could stick a branch in the ground out here, and it will grow. Swear to God.
And then, so how much of Brickard Creek, where there's residential development surrounding it, with that delineated wetland, is that in a PCA tract currently? And how will this impact something as a tract and or easements and, yeah.
Without doing a lot of digging, I can't tell you the answer.
It's an honest
So
answer.
PCA tracts are recorded as part of a plat. So I'd have to look up every plat in the city of Sedro-Woolley to tell you the answer to that. Yeah, we don't have that mapped anywhere per se. But yeah, so generally with PCA tracts, what you're going to see with residential development, for example, is it's a protected critical area tract. And there is that 5-year monitoring period for buffers that were reduced and then required enhancement per the current code. And then an HOA typically is established. After that 5-year monitoring period is over, then it's essentially the HOA's responsibility to ensure that the intent of those mitigation plantings that were done are established and maintained in that way for perpetuity. That doesn't always happen, so you'll see oftentimes, those things do get overgrown with blackberries, and You'll have danger trees coming down, and that's usually when the HOA maybe will start looking at things. If there's like danger trees overhanging properties, they're like, okay, maybe we need to look at maintaining that a little bit. But it's usually when there's a problem that arises that they do. Yeah, I don't know if that got to your question.
I'm wondering, so if those tracks are in place, then I have a house on Brickyard Creek and there's a tract and I've got my yard. Would the legality of the tract, does that protect that critical area boundary, or is no matter what, this tree height falling buffer is now going to encroach onto my property even if it's in a legally recorded tract? Because then would the tract have to be adjusted? And then what's the...
I would think this would kind of fall under the legal non-conforming aspect of things. Like the moment that you try to expand development, maybe, then we would look at applying the increased buffer. But if, you apply for repairs and maintenance, things like that, then we would say, no, the tract is recorded, that's your tract.
And so if, say I'm a property owner on Brickyard Creek and I want to do an addition to my home, is there gonna be a resource for me to utilize so that I do not need to spend the thousands and thousands of dollars to have a critical areas assessment completed? You can just tell me, hey, this is your buffer line, because that also, not only does the critical areas assessment would need to be completed, but then it needs to be delineated, and that delineation then needs to be surveyed, and then you're bringing a survey into it to give you exact boundaries and to just figure out if you could even like put on an extra bedroom in the back of your house.
I'm thinking more accessory dwelling units.
Or,
is
yeah,
what
an
I'm-
ADU, like,
That would be a more that would be a more
Yeah.
obvious thing.
Yeah.
And I think just to take that a step further, as a property owner, my mind's going to, if government rolls in and makes these buffer zones larger, and now all of a sudden I'm being told, but you can pay for mitigation fees and all this other stuff,
60
and now you
grand.
can do what you want to do. It's like, wait a minute, so you guys changed the buffers, and now you're restricting my stuff, but if I give you money, I can do what I was going to do initially. And I think that I might not be the only property owner that's thinking that.
That's why this is a good discussion, absolutely, yeah. But it's not mandated, although it is considered, right? So it's not set in concrete yet.
and I wonder if there's like a route to, I don't know, if we went to Department of Ecology and said, we have our code written this way because this percentage of usable land would be lost to our residents, and that is stealing. But like, that just feels like a crime. Especially on these independent people that just want to, and we're so encouraging more housing and like infill development and all this stuff. It just really doesn't feel aligned in my heart.
Well, it's not, it's
Yeah.
It's the opposite.
yeah.
Just something to think
I
about.
think every jurisdiction is grappling with the same
Yeah.
issues, because these are requirements that have been set by best available science, but jurisdictions are also then required to meet all of the other requirements of the Growth Management Act. And so you're not alone in that sentiment.
Yeah, and best available science has changed over time. I mean, we could beat best available science to death in many respects, and we could start talking about the in-stream flow rule, okay, when it pertains to the Skagit River. So, yeah, BAS is best available at this time, yes, and things change, yeah.
Those are all of my comments in regards to the buffers.
Sure you're not done?
Keep going.
In terms of the aquifer recharge areas, I am wondering, do we have a map? Or I wasn't, like, I've dealt with aquifer recharge areas out towards Hamilton, off Highway 20, you know, how many residents in Sedro-Woolley utilize, in city limits utilize a well? Is it a general question I have? And then how much of this is going to pertain to Sedro? And when do we know if we need an aquifer recharge assessment?
As far as active wells, very few.
Okay.
I'm just thinking along the river, there's some big farms down there, and a PUD doesn't go down to that level. I want to say it stops going all the way down. Jameson continues all the way down Minkler, and then it ends, I forget which, because I had a client that had a water leak there, and they thought he was stealing water. I made a couple phone calls, and that got fixed pretty quick, because I was afraid that it was going to affect the pressure that we had in town. But yeah, I want to say south, the southern border, I think there's only a couple of properties down there. Everything else is Skagit PUD.
Yeah, I think I've come across like one in the northeast corner too. But yeah, like 5 that I can
your
think
property?
of, you know. And then as far as aquifer recharge area, I believe like the official aquifer recharge area is outside of city limits.
We just need to take it into,
I don't have a map.
into consideration because our water goes into the ground and groundwater.
Yeah, I believe it's the headwaters of Brickyard Creek, which are outside of city limits.
So PUD covers Highway 9
Right.
up past the UGA right there.
yeah.
So all my neighbors that are on
an
Highway
8-inch
9
line,
have
too, yeah,
PUD.
yeah.
On the other side, so Bottomless Lake, you see at the upper left corner, it's sort of
Okay.
like this. PUD ends at my southernmost property line, so I have a well.
You would know, okay. That's why I asked.
But the 2 properties before me have PUD. And water is an issue up there. You either have a great well or you don't, and we don't have a great well, so we have to pay for water delivery every few months to augment what our well produces. And we're right next to Bottomless Lake,
You know, you can
which is
expand-
amazing.
You can expand that line at $362 a lineal foot.
Yeah,
I'll be
and
more than happy to
good
do
luck.
it.
Yeah, and we've been told it could or could not help you. And so we just pay $300 and have water delivered instead. But it, yeah.
Do your other neighbors have that same situation?
So, so north of us is farmland. And then across the street, there's a hand dug well on a property. And then there's a great well. And I'm gonna put a hose into that one, and I'm gonna string it to, no, I'm kidding. Water insecurity is definitely a thing when you're on a well that's not really consistent. So I'd be curious about this aquifer thing, because we are very close to Bottomless Lake, which I was told is a vent off of Mount Baker. Like, the water is really, really good. And my well is so close to it, and we're just not there, with 2 teenagers in the house.
Yeah, so I guess I'm just wondering what parameters would require, because you can do an aquifer recharge assessment for, water quality, like the sourcing, if you have a well or you're going to drill another well, how is that going to affect the water levels? And then for the development side of things, so how is your land disturbing activity going to seep down into groundwater? So my question is, when do I know when I need one?
So the city currently has designated Category 1 critical aquifer recharge areas, and there is a map that Skagit County has on their website to identify sole source aquifers, which are intended to be regulated as Category 1 critical aquifer recharge areas. And then our recommendations include expanding when specific uses that might degrade potable water have to have a specific report to do that. And those are established in state law as well. So the city could publish the map to make that more clear to the community on when these reports are going to be required. Because I think right now the map is not available on the city's website.
That would be, I think, very helpful to anyone who needs to do one. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
That was all I had for aquifer recharge area. For the Fish and Wildlife Habitat Conservation Area standards. In here it notes a 100-foot wide buffer is estimated to achieve 95% pollution removal and approximately 85% surface nitrogen. So is there an option just, like, that sounds good. Like with that 100-foot buffer, you're able to meet this criteria. I know this isn't in regards to habitat necessarily, right? This is in regards to water quality, but I don't know. Just a thought. If this is a best available science, that they know that this is this is good thing at least 100 feet. So when you think of 100 feet versus 270, whatever, it seems like a really large amount more area when, like, if you're talking about water quality standards, like, you're already have really high water quality just within the 100 feet.
Yes, and I think that's why most of the jurisdictions that we're working with have elected to depart from best available science and the site potential tree height methodology, and utilize a minimum 100-foot buffer width for non-fish perennial streams, and then for fish-bearing streams, capture the 75% of all site potential tree height values to better align with the site potential tree height methodology. But I do want to provide the disclaimer that Skagit County did propose the 150 feet and 100 feet for type F and type N streams, and they are currently being appealed by the Friends of Skagit County, but we won't have a decision on what that appeal looks like until July 1st.
Does that trickle down? Let's say we put some different code than the county has in place. Do they overrule what we have? I mean, we had that happen with accessory dwelling units in the last legislative session where we already had code. We tried front-running it 3 years ago to get it in place before the state got a hold of it and then threw something totally different at us. Does do those concepts and overall mandates apply at that level as well, where if the bigger jurisdiction has a certain set of guidelines and rules, are the children like Sedro-Woolley required to apply by those standards?
Alex,
think
I can help answer that.
Go ahead.
Okay, good.
So it depends on what the standards are, but in most cases,
Okay,
if you have your own set of rules, then you go by your own set of rules.
okay, no,
Yeah.
that's.
So, for example, if you, up until recently, a lot of cities didn't have their own shoreline management programs, and so they adopted the counties. But since then, I think most of them now have developed their own, and they go
Like,
by
whoops.
their own. Yeah, yeah. And it could be, I mean, Friends of Skagit County, may have appealed Skagit County, but they may not come appeal you, or they could, you know what I mean? And the Growth Management and Hearings Board will treat it like separately, yeah.
I just want to make sure that if we're going to spend time on this to get it right for Sedro-Woolley, that there's not some superseding power that can say, hey, you just wasted 5 months doing this, and it just will not be acceptable.
Right, yeah,
So-
the only thing I can think of is where, in your countywide planning policies, when all the jurisdictions come together to make agreements on housing allocations, and you deviated from that agreement,
Okay.
that would be where they would supersede,
Okay.
yeah.
Flood hazard area. So I guess I'm curious. So the city of Mount Vernon has a whole flood model, right? And you can go to a consultant and say, hey, we need a rise analysis completed to see how much if our development will raise floodwaters by more than a foot, I think is their standard within the city's area. The city of Burlington had required that same rise analysis on a project that was completed behind the dike near the river, though. But they do not have a flood model completed. So every rise analysis consultant that was reached out to said, I've got to model the whole city to be able to give you this information. That's going to cost more than this project is going to cost you. So I'm curious on, and maybe it's just not as detrimental to the city of Sedro-Woolley because we aren't, our flood was in the city was worrisome, right? But it's not like we're looking at the gate of Mount Vernon and you can see the floodwaters that could just take out the whole city. Is there going to be requirements that come along with this flood hazard area section update that the city would at any point need a rise analysis completed, or is this more just for like the backwater flow? Because I know even like Brickyard Creek, the bridge in Bucko Estates that needs to be built, right? There's a hydrologist involved who has to take data from 1990 and figure out what the velocity of the flow is in the scour and do all of these calculations on really outdated data so that they can move forward with engineering the bridge to whatever engineering standard is required for that bridge. So my question, I guess, is does the city have any plans to do any kind of reporting, analysis, or of any sort that would help the applicant to, or the consultants who are working for the applicant to complete their portion of a review to give them like accurate information to move forward on a project?
This is definitely something we've been looking at. So, City of Sedro-Woolley relies on 1989 FEMA firm maps to determine the base flood elevation specific to a property that we see is in the 100-year floodplain. Thankfully, the vast majority of Sedro-Woolley is out of the 100-year floodplain. Pretty minimal coverage there. You're talking like Riverfront Park is within the 100-year floodplain. There's a few properties that kind of start up.
It actually goes straight to Jameson. So if you're south of Jameson, that's the 100-year floodplain. Because when we had the evacuation, back in December, everybody in the floodplain needed to evacuate. They put the level 1 warning out at 5:30. Then by 7:15 that night, everybody had to evacuate, practically the entire city of Burlington. It was crazy. Yeah.
So that's about right. The important thing to note, the flooding that we experienced back in December, that was not a 100-year event. It was a major flood event. A 100-year event would be a situation where we were seeing the wastewater treatment plant inundated. We'd shut that down, the sewer out of commission for who knows how long.
It got close, by the way.
About 3 feet.
Just
It
saying.
was nerve-wracking.
And we were below where they expected it to crest. We were 3 feet below.
Yeah. So, noting our experiences, watching the gauges, we know that the FEMA flood maps do not show us existing conditions as they are today. The river is fluid. It is constantly changing and has been doing so over the last 40 years. Imagine that. So, yes, definitely something we've been looking at. SC Squared has made a proposal to do kind of a data sharing agreement, something like that. That's been running through council. I don't quite know where decisions are with that, but it's essentially this partnership with, is it Swinomish tribe, Tom? Yeah, Swinomish tribe and maybe a couple others, just to do essentially updated flood modeling for all of Skagit County. And they would do kind of deep dive zoom ins on each of the respective jurisdictions. That being said, this does increase the 100-year floodplain. Floodplain development regulations may need to be updated depending on, level of what we see is the threat, which also affects, property values and flood insurance, needing to get that.
And it's dynamic,
It
because over the years, there was that massive flood in Mount Vernon back in, I want to say it was 2006, that put in all the new levees and dikes and everything else. Well, I didn't know this until I started on a planning commission, and Julia Johnson was part of the group that would meet down with the Army Corps of Engineers. So the more those projects go downriver, it pushes the water upriver, or it just doesn't let it drain like it normally would. So yeah, it's a dynamic situation. So of course those maps are going to change, absolutely. And the river takes
Thing
its
I
own.
really liked getting to see SC Squared's work was they did have some modeling for Brickyard Creek, showing the backflow, which is super helpful for us planning for new developments coming in where they're adjacent to Brickyard Creek. So we know roughly, what capacity are we working with when we're saying we're going to start discharging more and more water to the creek. How is that going to impact?
Into a flood situation on top of that.
Yeah.
It's not going to go.
Right. So yes, something we've been looking into.
Thank you. I think that's all my comments.
Yeah, but those are all so valid, though. I'm glad you spent the time doing it.
Yeah, I want to, Donna, thank you so much, and Alex, thank you so much for clarifying and for putting this report together. This made it really, it was a great tool to kind of like get us started and give us an idea, overviews. Like, this was very helpful rather than just like dissecting a new code versus an old code and trying to figure out what's changing. So I appreciate you guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you for all your great questions. You bring up some really good points, and we can follow up on the in lieu fee program and any further discussions about other options too.
Thank you.
Let's talk about the next step on this, I guess. What is the plan? We're doing a little bit more, we'll come back with a report or an update for planning commission?
Yeah, we can do that. So, I mean, we can take a look at some of the topics that we discussed this evening and see if there's additional options that we can present once we come back. Hopefully we could gather some direction from the Planning Commission that we could then put together some code amendments that we could vet in a public format.
Okay, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that'll give the planning commission and us to think about comments that came up tonight too, and if any of you have any questions between now and the next meeting, please contact us.
I'm just
too.
going to throw this out there. We're kind of unique, so if we could just keep, it's a lot of work when you start looking at different things. So to keep it Sedro-Woolley centric, I mean, this just really isn't a huge town, size-wise. So we have a really great idea of to where these specific issues, where those impacts are. I mean, there's things that, affect properties that, that either they're out of the city limits or they're very limited and isolated for a geographic reason, like properties directly along the river that would have riparian issues. But it doesn't look like a lot of the things that we're discussing is like wide-reaching that'll affect even 70% of the city, So to keep that that focus on what we need to focus on, I think helps you guys out quite a bit. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for all the great questions and for just your thoughtfulness and as you read through the document, I know it was a lot. And so, I mean, and besides, we talked about some big things, but also there were some minor recommendations in there too, quite a few. So if there's anything else you see in there later on, when after you push aside the big things like the buffers and that are concerned, or if you have any questions, please reach out to staff or to us. Matthew, you look like you have a question.
I'm not an environmental scientist, so I tried to figure out figure 5. It was in a slide, and I don't know what I'm looking at. So you don't have to explain it now, but the figure 5, the community effectiveness versus distance from channel, all the different curves. I don't know what I'm looking at. So I tried to read it, and so
Yeah, it's a lot. Yeah.
I don't understand what the graph means. I'm figure 5.
Yeah, we can provide more, an overview of that at the next meeting.
That would help me.
Yeah, you bet. We'll have Alex here. She knows it much better than I do.
I know what the different root and translator fall. I don't know what they mean. So,
Alex, did you hear that?
figure 5. It was on the presentation as well.
Yeah, we can figure that out for next time.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
do an overview.
And I'm not an environmental scientist. So.
We're planners.
Anything else up here? Well, thanks, Alex and Donna, and all the great comments up here. I think we learned a lot tonight, and I'm getting dizzy. But anyway, it's 8:33, and if we can move on. The next topic is updates to Chapter 2.90 Sedro-Woolley Municipal Code, Consolidated Planning Procedures coming soon.
That's me. So just an update for you guys. Planning staff have in the background been working on some updates to Chapter 290. It's a nightmare of a code. This is our consolidated planning procedures chapter. So the goal is to simplify and modernize the code. So they're easier to understand, easier for us to administer, and a little bit more predictable for applicants and the public to use. This chapter has not had a full overhaul since 2008. So it has become long, difficult to navigate, and in some places outdated. So as our procedures and development regulations have been updating, this chapter hasn't exactly been keeping up. For the most part, permitting procedures generally stay the same. It's more just, you'll see tables in there that it's like, provide 10 copies of the SEPA checklist to the planning department. And it's like, no, we've moved to electronic format now, so we just need the one. But things like that, and then just streamlining things to just be way easier to navigate, and it's lengthy anyway. So yeah, we're gonna look at Chapter 290, related code sections, Public Works Department standards, permit applications, the master fee schedule, any other procedural documents that 290 comes up. So it's quite the overhaul, and it will take time, so give us some grace with that. But yeah, it's kind of the first step in implementing that new comprehensive plan goal of timely, fair, and predictable permitting. So,
You know, you would think
coming
there'd be
soon.
some commentary on this provided by the invested individuals, specifically what are we looking at right now in 2.90. So, yeah, I could easily see some good comments coming from our development community of how this could get streamlined. The purpose and intent is fine.
Yeah.
So. Hey, can I add one more thing before we adjourn? You know, we were so close, and it was kind of like a focus of the council. We were so close on cottage cluster and park model and that whole middle housing model. I'd like to see that back on the agenda to wrap that up. I mean, we're like 90% of the way done. So, but I get the importance of this other stuff. So I'm just throwing that out there. I'd like to get that completed because we spent a lot of time on it before we all start losing our memory. And turning 67, I start losing my memory, just saying.
Definitely on our radar. We have not forgotten.
Okay. I'll
This,
keep reminding
we'd
you.
like to do this first just because it's kind of the backbone for the rest of things moving
I
forward.
get it.
So
No, I'm fine. I'm just-
trying to parse things out in the best efficient way manner so we don't have to, do an update that we have to retroactively go and fix something else.
Just mentioning it, just keeping it on
Yep.
the radar, that's all.
On the radar.
We
It's
got, we
there.
got busy airspace. I totally get it.
That's
One
great.
step at a
That's
time, but
great.
we'll get there.
Yeah, I think you're right. We wanted to get our comp plan done, and then with the development regs, we wanted to, as part of our implementation of the comp plan, to make a package of solutions or implementation type code adjustments for our housing, and roll those into there. What we might do is maybe since we were so far along, do that in phases. So maybe the first phase would be the thing that, what do you call it, the low-hanging fruit, stuff that
Yeah,
we're
no,
almost done
absolutely.
with.
Yeah.
And then
Even if we
tackle
spend
the more
15,
difficult
20
stuff
minutes
later.
on it in a meeting and just keep it moving along, not going like what we did tonight, but,
Yeah.
especially on critical areas, but to just keep it moving along, just
Yeah.
even refreshers as to where we were even at.
Yeah.
We stopped here.
Yeah, I think, thank you for doing that. That's really great. Keep it in front of us, yeah.
Well, it's 8:37. Okay, is there anything else before I ask for an adjournment?
I make a motion to adjourn.
Wait.
Wait, we have something from,
No, just Ashton and I are working hard to see if maybe we'll be ready to present a first draft of the 290 updates by the June 16th meeting.
Okay?
Maybe. It's a lot of work, so give us grace if we don't meet that timeline.
Oh, no way.
June 16th, okay. Anything else? Anything else up here? Okay, I did hear
I make a motion to adjourn.
that first from Commissioner Fatisi to adjourn.
I second
Commissioner
the
Bowman
motion.
seconds, all in favor. Oh, any
Further
other
discussion?
discussion? There you go, Joe.
I'm just,
I want to hear some discussion now.
Nope, I have none. Anyone else?
Anyone else? All in favor of adjourning?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Nay? None. We're out of here, 8:38, 8:39.